Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host and creator of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I'm covering a piece that I had posted in August of 2020. And the article is entitled On the Lack of Crowns, the Difficulty of Recognizing Yourself as a Black Man. Now, this is a topic that is always fascinating to me from the first time that I really started learning about the racial situation in Brazil. And I just remember reading in the Africana Encyclopedia back in the year 2000, where, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't seen the book. I have the book like stored away and stored somewhere, and I haven't seen it in years. But if I'm not mistaken, that book estimated that the Black population in Brazil could be anywhere from 53 million to like 120 million or something like that. And then when you consider official census, that number could easily drop down to, today, some people would say, if you just want to take just Black people, and it would say the country has about 16 million Black people out of about, I don't know, the population of Brazil must be about 215 or 220 million by now. And they would say about 16 million people identify as Black. But then if you take the more expansive, fluid category of Blackness, then you come up with a number that says, there are about 110 million Black people in the country or more. What explains this huge range of what you would call Black in Brazil? Well, once again, we get into the ongoing debate that questions what and who is Black in Brazil, because if you only take people who identify themselves, self-classify themselves as what we call preto, which in Brazil means Black. There's two words in Portuguese that mean Black: preto and negro. We would say Negro, but they say negro. So on the official census, Brazil's official census, you only have 5 color categories. You can have preto, meaning Black; pardo, meaning brown or mixed; branco, meaning white; amarelo, meaning Asian or yellow; and índio, meaning like Native American, Native Brazilian, if you will. So the only way you can come up with over 100 million Black people in Brazil is if you combine the Black and brown categories. And again, just so you remember, brown in Brazil is not quite the same as what you see or what you hear when you consider Black and brown in the United States. When people say brown in the United States, they're more or less talking about the Hispanic or Latino population. In Brazil, as it is a Latin American country, brown does not mean Latino. People look at brown, the term in Portuguese being pardo, as just people who are mixed. They're non-white. Some people classify pardos as just Black people who have a lighter skin tone. There are the range of phenotypes within that pardo category would be enough to be confused. That would be confusing enough trying to figure out who's Black in Brazil if you just looked at the pardo population. Some people believe these are two separate categories. Preto being more obviously Black, and pardo being anywhere from almost white to, you can have very brown skinned people being called pardo. Just depends. Again, what do you consider to be Black? Now, once upon a time, after years of studying this situation, I was convinced that all pretos and pardos just belong in the Black category. But as I really started to, when I started living in the country and seeing just how deep this racial mixture was just in the general population, and then when the controversy over who should be allowed to take advantage of the affirmative action program, I had to start, reanalyzing what I thought about this question of every pardo being Black, because there are some pardos that, quite honestly, you just cannot classify themselves racially. You can't classify these people according to just one race. I've seen numerous people in Brazil. I'm like, I'm not going to try to classify this person. So these type of people, you just throw them in the pardo category. But then what type of mixture is it? Is it a Black and white mixture? Is it say a dark skinned black person with a lighter skinned black person? Is it a white person mixed with an Indian mixing with a black person? Pardu can be almost anything of any sort of mixture. Um, and once you start really looking at the population, that is something you have to rethink. I'm comfortable today to say that in reality, nobody can really say how many black people there are in Brazil. For activists of the black rights movement in Brazil, they'll go with the 110, 120 million number because they're combining the black and brown category. I'm just saying, after I've seen a number of contradictions come out in this discussion, I've had to change my position. I remember when I first started getting into this discussion about race in Brazil, and I would have these debates with people in academia. A lot of them, some of them were quote unquote Hispanic or Latino, and they would have this discussion and this point where they would say, "Look, you can't really look at Brazil in the same lens of race that you look at the United States. Brazil is a country that's been mixing for like 4 or 5 centuries now, so." There are the depths of mixture in the country is one that you cannot just apply the one drop rule to Brazil, because by some estimates, like you could say between 85 and 90% of the population has some degree of admixture in their bloodline. So, what do you consider to be mixed? What is black? What is white? I mean, you can't even just look at Brazil's white population and say automatically that all of those people who consider themselves white are actually white. Some of those people leave Brazil and they go to Europe or the United States and be like, and then they discover, oh, people don't see me as white in the United States, right? Um, unless you're going to move the bar on what is considered white, which in Brazil is already the rule. There's plenty of white people in the white category who clearly has some type of racial admixture. So anyway, with these 4 to 5 centuries of mixing, you can understand how sometimes it might be difficult for people to come across a racial identity. And I've done a lot of stories, just translating the stories of people, Brazilians who come into this transition into being black. So this is just one of the articles that I'm going to tackle. We'll get into more later on, but again, the difficulty of recognizing yourself as a black man. Okay, so I swear I never get tired of this topic debate. For decades, maybe even centuries, many Brazilians of color grew up being taught to avoid defining themselves as negros or black people, even if their features denoted their African ancestry, these features made it undeniable. Like, no, you're not black. You're escuro, meaning dark. You're moreno escuro. You're like brown, dark brown, mixed race with dark skin, whatever. You're mahon bonbon. You're like dark brown. Many would be black people grew up hearing from people in their own families. This is the type of stuff that people in your own family telling you that you're not black. Being black was something to be ashamed of, and one must avoid this label at all cost. Being called black in Portuguese, being preto or negro, was considered an insult, and in many ways, the terms can still be used in a pejorative manner today. For decades, the Movimento Negro, which is just the umbrella term of the Black rights movement in Brazil, Brazil's modern day Black rights movement has been a constant campaign to encourage more Brazilians of visible African ancestry to define themselves as Black. And in the past decade and a half, maybe, we've been seeing some real gains in this movement. Every few years, we see new data revealing that persons that once defined themselves as pardos, again, brown or mixed, morenos, mestizos, and mulattoes, were coming to define themselves as pretos. Much of this shift in identity has to do with the identity campaign, but much of it has a lot to do with the university quota system, which opened the floodgates for non-white Brazilians to get access to a college education in numbers never before seen in Brazil's history. Historically, the university was seen as a place for white people and those who weren't exactly white, but were close enough in the Brazilian context. So a couple of things I want to highlight here. When we look at strictly the category preto, meaning black, the percentage of people identifying themselves strictly as black and not pardo or brown has risen over the years. The last count I saw is probably at 16 or 17 million. And there's always been this question. um, can we really define how many people, how many black people there are in this country? You know, it's I don't think it's a possible task because it just depends on so much. Two people could look at the same person and see somebody see him as white, another person see him as black. One of the first controversies Brazilians have said for years when the question of affirmative action policies came up, they said this for years, like, how can you divvy out quotas for black people in Brazil when it's difficult for some people to be just defined as one race. And the perfect example was this one particular case that basically spelled out what people have been saying all along. Like there was these twin brothers that applied to get into the university under the quota system. Now, based on the judges who were classifying them to judge if they were quote unquote black enough, one of the brothers was classified as white and the other brother was classified as black. And it was, everybody was like, aha, see that? That's exactly what we're arguing about. So, it depends on what your lens for blackness is. To nowadays in the United States, a lot of you got people who still believe that if a person has any definable African ancestry or has any phenotype connected to blackness, then they're automatically just black. Where nowadays you have a lot of people saying, look, stop calling those people black, they're mixed. So, I mean, whose classification do we follow in terms of what it means to be black? Okay, so with access to university courses, many non-whites, whether they define themselves as black or brown, came to understand that children of white elites didn't necessarily accept their growing presence in the country's top universities. In fact, they were learning that their presence wasn't really accepted in many areas of society that were generally frequented mostly by white or near white Brazilians. This new experience with the way Brazilians see race versus how people perceive Brazilians see race made many begin to see through the smokescreen called racial democracy that the nation's elites had promoted for so long. For the movimento negro, whether you were preto or pardo, you were black. And after dealing with various manifestations of Brazilian racism, many were coming to that conclusion on their own. Now, let me be clear. I no longer believe every pardo is black, but this shift in racial consciousness has led to some very intriguing scenarios. Due to the experiences of being in predominantly white environments, some people were entering the universities as pardos, morenos, and mestizos, and coming out as black after 4 years. But then the struggle over racial quotas had another effect, that of white and racially ambiguous Brazilians entering college by defining themselves as preto or pardo. The situation of racial fraud got so bad that the members of the Movimento Negro felt the necessity of creating panels to judge the physical characteristics of quota applicants in order to define who was or wasn't black or brown enough. That's a whole nother case. When I look into this situation, for years, a lot of white Brazilians expressed anger because they felt some of them were being blocked from getting into university because non-white people were using quotas to slip in by gaining a few extra points on their what's called the vestibular, the college entrance exam. So then some people just figure, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. So a lot of these people who considered themselves white for most of their lives or whatever, they would suddenly switch races and okay, now all of a sudden they consider themselves brown. And they would start getting into the university using the quota system, right? So then, it became a huge debate. They had to start putting out like I don't know, quota guards or something, people who would just keep an eye on people who were slipping through the cracks and taking up places that should have been awarded to black and brown people. When people who have been identified themselves as white their whole lives, suddenly they want to become brown and then get into the university as black people, right? So this is just a few of the articles. This was a really good one. I'll get into this, hopefully I can get to this article one day. But when you see this woman's before and after picture, it was like, how did she do that? It seemed when you look at the picture of her when she went to the university and then you see after she had graduated what her appearance looked like. It was almost, I mean, the picture on the left almost looked like she's got on blackface or something. She swears up and down that wasn't the case. They accused her of like using something to, darken her skin. in order to get quotas. It kind of reminded me, I don't know how many of you remember this movie from I think it was like 86, 87, 88, somewhere in there. It was this movie called Soul Man. And that's exactly what this white guy did. He wanted to go to a university. I guess he couldn't get in on his own test scores. So he found a way to darken his skin. He put on an afro, curly wig, and he quote unquote passed for black. So this is something that you see going on in Brazil a lot, because those would be white people in Brazil who might not be accepted as white in the United States and have been white all of their lives, all of a sudden, when they see a benefit, they want to switch up and call themselves pardus, brown. Oh, I'm mixed. Oh, my great grandfather was black. So it's an intriguing situation. This is one of the reasons why I really had to start looking at it with a different viewpoint at a certain point. So anyway, not want to get away from the topic here. Let's get back to this article on the lack of crowns, the difficulty of recognizing yourself. This is what happened to the guy in the photo posted at the top of this article. All right, this guy right here. I have to go into his story at a later date, and he's not the author of the piece below, but I connect his story to the piece below and ask the question: how much does hair texture play into how you define someone racially? I mean, if someone's hair is considered tightly curled, quote unquote, nappy, kinky, or what Brazilians say, crespo or pichain, generally people will associate people with this characteristic as black. But what happens when someone has light to dark brown skin, but they have straight hair? There are millions of pardus in Brazil who look like Fabricio, the guy in the photo above. If it's difficult for you to determine if they're black or not, think about the identity gymnastics people with light to dark brown skin and straight hair go through when they try to define themselves. Again, take a look at this guy, right? I mean, if you saw him walking down the street, how would you define him? Would you say he's black? Would you say he's mixed? Would you think he's Latino? But that's just the question. Who? And on top of that, which classification is stronger? Does he get to just say, okay, I identify myself as black, versus people who define him as either black or not black? Which wins out between the self identity and the classification? So needless to say, this guy, who I can say he's non-white, right? Years ago I would have been like, okay, he's black, just period. And for some people, in Brazil, because of the growing racial politics in the country, a lot of people are just skipping through the Pardo category and just saying, yeah, he's black. He's not white, so he's black. And even though for some people that might sound like, shades of one dropism in the United States, in reality, there is a historical context to this, because in the southern portion of Brazil, there was actually a saying that says, it was something like, and I can't remember how they said it in Portuguese, but it was something to the degree of the person who is not white, he is black. And in this phrase, it clearly is. This isn't something, of course, we know this really exists in the United States, but the thought was in Brazil that this did not exist. But one of these days, I have to come up to that phrase. It's a negro, quem no é branco, negro ele é. I think it says something like that, right? Whoever is not white, they're black. That's basically what that saying was saying. Anyway, so let's get into this piece by Marco Tullio Coraggi. I need to confess an attitude that I have been having on a recurring basis for some time. The act of searching for photos of black men with straight hair on Google. Since childhood, anyone of color has had the experience of not seeing themselves in cartoons and TV series. It is almost a rite of passage to notice that the perceptions of beauty, which must be seen, do not pass through the appearance of their fellow men. I went through this experience, and without a doubt, I was thrilled to know old productions and to perceive new creations that tension the aesthetic standards to which one was accustomed. But in a way, for me, something was still missing. Coming from both grandmothers and grandfathers, both white and black, with 4B, 4C hair, I was born a black man with light skin and straight hair. Looking at all these examples on TV, in the cinema, in music, even though they were much closer to my look than the previous examples, I still felt completely out of place when I realized something that seemed to make us completely disconnected from each other: the hair. We know how the population still treats the black man's hair. The low cuts and the lack of voluminous hair are the result of a racist hegemony that dictates that such appearance is more, quote unquote, presentable. As much as the Black woman's hair is still surrounded by social taboos, the discussions within our own community seem to be much more advanced in several aspects. Nowadays, I could say that I am satisfied with being a viewer of racial revolution that is taking place, where I can notice a variety of Black phenotypes. But that self identification didn't occur in childhood, still has its place in my subconscious. On the lack of crowns, the difficulty of recognizing yourself. Having straight hair never prevented me from being called besudo or big lipped, morenino, being a little dark or mixed, and the like. But it seems to have prevented many times other Blacks from seeing in me the African diaspora that they saw in themselves and in their close friends. It should be noted that in no way do I come here to define any kind of campaign for more pretos de pele clara or light skinned Blacks or something like that. Issues such as colorism and passability, studied in droves in our time, already demonstrate the various privileges for being a man and having the appearance that I have. What I really want is to see more pretos and pretos y pretas hechintas, meaning dark-skinned Black men and women, in all environments which are considered inaccessible, because I know the political importance that their bodies have in a country that purposely promoted policies to whiten its population. Whitening policies are a genocide assisted by the state. Again, he's talking about. I did a piece a few days ago where it showed this picture called the Ham's Redemption, where it shows the depiction of a Black family becoming white after 2 to 3 generations, and this is what the Brazilian state promoted for decades. Starting back in the late 19th century. So this is what he's talking about. Again, we get into this question of, does real love across racial lines exist? Of course it exists. But the other question is, how much of this miscegenation that goes on in Brazil is based on the Black family desiring to whiten itself after a few generations? It's a pertinent question. What I actually report here is a much more personal issue that may be able to contribute to other people in the same situation. In times of such pulsating social, political, racial clashes, it is more than necessary to bring out the intrinsic value linked to Black power. Countless people in our community have already suffered and still suffer for having hair that define the status quo dictated by whiteness. The symbolism of Afro hair should, and makes all sense, be placed as a symbol of the struggle and of a whole community, but it should not be used as the only element for measuring Blackness. By not assessing a particular race just because of someone's hair, it is developing an imaginary stereotype in which all Black people should look the same. It's denying the power of Pan-Africanism and understanding the African continent as a visual hegemony. Not having the same hair to which I am automatically assigned has already prevented me from pronouncing myself as Black several times. The breaking of this process has been a daily path, a process of self-knowledge until one day fully understanding that I can be king even if I don't have a crown. All right, so this speaks volumes about the importance of for example, just someone's hair texture in Brazil, how it can define whether somebody is considered Black or white. There was an old saying that people used to in Brazil. I don't know if people still say it today, but it used to be a saying that says, well, he's kind of dark, but his hair is good. Oh, and I can't remember what book I saw that in, but it was the point of, it's almost like the society says, okay, we can accept the dark skin, but you can't have, tightly coiled, quote unquote, kinky or nappy hair. So this article just speaks to a topic that probably affects millions of Brazilians, because it's easy to walk down the street in any state in Brazil and see a guy who looks like this guy in this picture. How do you define him? If he were to apply for affirmative action quotas for Black people, do you think this guy should be able to, should he qualify for being entered into the quota system as a Black man? What would you say? Because looking at his picture, this is something, when the whole debate and the arguments over quotas started coming up like 22 years ago, it was guys who look like him and women who look like him that were the center of attention, because it's like, okay, should this guy get in on quotas? Because of, we're going to adapt sort of a one drop rule type of classification to put people who look like him in the black category. It's an ongoing debate. And like I said, I've had to even switch my own views and just come to the conclusion like, hey, we can't just define all people as one race. I can't see it. For some of you, you could look at this guy and say, yeah, I see he's black. And other people like, no, he should fit clearly in the Pardu or mixed category. I'm going to just leave this article with something. I remember it had to been about 2017 or so. I was having a debate, it might have been on Twitter somewhere, and it was about this very question. I mean, I was asking people and posting pictures of certain people, and it's like, okay, you see this guy, this woman that's black or white. And I was having this debate with some Americans. And one particular guy jumped into the debate, and all of a sudden, I was just trying to say how race sometimes is just so deceptive. Somebody says who they are or what they are, and people accept it. I mean, the question of I think her name is Paris Jackson, one of Michael Jackson's children. I'm gonna be real. I still don't believe those are his kids biologically. I think he adopted them. But there was I was debating with this, another African American, and he swore up and down like, "Look, I can see it. I think she's black." And I'm just like, we are so deceived by this idea of one dropism that we can see a girl who looks like Paris Jackson and say, "Yeah, she's black too." So anyway, I'm gonna end this right here because this is obviously going to be an ongoing discussion about racial classification in Brazil, and Brazilians who are coming into accepting this identity as black, right? Anyway, so if you liked this piece, if you learned something, share a comment. What did you think? What were your thoughts as I went through this article? Definitely, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you liked other videos, consider subscribing to the channel. Ring that little notification button just to let you know when I post up new videos, because I hope to keep them coming. So I'm gonna conclude here, and thanks for checking out this video, and I hope you continue to go on this ride with me. Until next time.